The long-awaited battle has returned. Tony Northrup versus Jared Polin in Jared Polin's RawTalk podcast long-form discussion style debate. But before we get into Tony Northrup and Jared Polin, what's up, you guys? This is Devin with Century Effects Studios TV, back with another video. And today we're going to be talking about Tony Northrup versus Jared Polin, the long-form debate RawTalk video from Jared Polin's channel. Now, to understand this debate, you have to understand Jared Polin and Tony Northrup. By extension, Chelsea Northrup, because they're both a part of Tony Northrup's channel, but I do not want to go too far without mentioning her because it's Tony and Chelsea Northrup on the channel tag. But this is specifically talking about Jared Polin and Tony because Tony has, ideas that Chelsea is definitely not a part of, but I'm pretty sure she agrees with him on some extent, because they have a channel together. But at the same time, you have to understand that it does say Tony and Chelsea Northrup. You want to make sure that you give Chelsea credit for being there because Chelsea does an amazing job on a Tony and Northrup, the Northrup channel. But to understand Jared Polin, we have to understand this aggressive, this competitive, this outwardly competitive guy that has competitive looking pictures of himself as his avatar. He has I Shoot Raw on his shirt. That's his brand. He shoots raw, and he has t-shirts. He has merchandise that he sells about this I Shoot Raw. Raw, the format of pictures that he shoots, it really talks about more than just the format that he shoots, but also his idealism behind how he teaches photography and how he shoots photography. He likes to shoot in a more traditional style of photography, probably the initial style of, I want to say, digital photography when it became popular. Everybody shooting raw was the most important thing. Getting as much information to that camera so you can edit the picture in post was amazing. And it's still a very, very important part of photography. But it's a very traditionalist way of thinking about things today in the photography world, where we have cell phones, we have drones, we have a whole bunch of other things. Now, with that said, Jared's whole idealism comes from this traditional type of mindset where he is more along the lines of, don't change things. Do this right. You can only do it this way. You cannot do it that way because that way is wrong. There's no other way to do it. This is how I said it. This is how I've done it my whole life. There's no other way you can do it. That's how Jared thinks. And nowhere in his thinking does he really give room for, hey, there might be a middle ground. It's very rare that I hear Jared Polin come to a middle ground on the things that he likes to do, the way he teaches, the way he likes to shoot. Whereas Tony Northrup is the opposite end of the spectrum. He always challenges everything he's heard in the photography tradition, how we've been taught, how we feel about things when it comes to photography from the film world to the digital world. So when Tony goes about teaching these things, he's more palatable when he expresses himself, but he is very, 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 very technical. Tony is very technical, and he will tell you TLDR, hey, this is going to be technical and it's going to be a long form format. But he is very, very easy to digest when it comes to a person that you want to talk to. He comes across more of like a lecturer, a college professor that you see all the time, that you can really actually pretty much ask any question and you can expect him to give the most educated guess or experience or have most of the answers most of the time. Whereas Jared Polin is, this is right, this is wrong. Tony Northrup is more like, okay, let me experience this. Let me put it through its paces. Let me challenge this thought of the 2016 rule, color science. Let me test this thought of ISO and how it translates to each camera. And then let me get back with you with a more updated assessment. Let me get back with you with a more modern take on this, because what we've learned in the past might not be correct or as accurate as it is now in the future, because the whole way of doing things have turned up on its head with the advent of technology. Tony is very, very strong in his technical background. He has a technical background, and I recall him saying that his father also had a technical background, and that's how he expresses himself. He does not want to give anybody wrong information, but he also wants to experience it himself before he gives it back out to the public, which is very, very great, because you will have people just telling people based on what they feel and what they've done in the past, not knowing that things have always evolved with technology, especially cameras. You have cell phones, drones, all these, you got the DJI Osmo Pocket 3, you have the 360 cameras, and you have these smartphones that can do major things in the photography world. And we never really stop to think about how it has changed how we need to teach as photography educators and influencers. And so, with all that said, let's get right into the RawTalk debate with Tony Northrup and Jared Polin. Now, the first thing they started to talk about was this simple photo hack that Tony brought up. Tony brought up this video and he said, hey, this is a simple photo hack in the title or something like that. And it was a clickbaity title, a lot of people thought. And basically the photo hack was taking your, I'm going to say mirrorless camera from your eye and holding it down and flipping the screen out. Now, this mimics a lot of the photography that we do today because we hold our cell phones out away from our face. We don't hold our cell phone up like this. We don't have this eyepiece viewfinder. We have the electronic viewfinder that is the big screen, and we just use that. Matter of fact, some of the beginner cameras that Canon makes and Nikon makes, it does not have the EVF where you can look inside the camera and, you know, have it up to your face. No, it just has that big screen on the back, and that's how you have to use it. Now, they can sell cameras at, you know, a lot cheaper prices doing this, but Jared does not agree with you taking the camera from your face, from using an eyepiece, and then using the back screen, and then, you know, going down, going up, and using the different perspectives that way. He thinks that majority of your photography should be photographed with your camera up to your face, and Tony described it as a hack that made his photography even better. Now, Tony then goes and defends himself, which I don't agree. And he says, you know, well, he says this word pretty much verbatim, I'm lazy, and I want to take the path of least resistance because I'm a human, and humans take the path of least resistance. I don't think that that was a good way of defending yourself when it comes to Jared Polin because he's so competitive, because he's so outwardly, I want to say, aggressive about the things that he says and he does. Tony rarely cusses. Jared, he will cuss to make his point across or give his point across. Now, YouTube has definitely muted a lot of that type of language, but when it comes to making an impact on the public or to even prove your point in any situation, especially against the Jared Polin, I wouldn't use the word lazy. And I didn't think that was really good, but Jared just responds and says it's, you know, BS. And I'm going to, you know, mute myself so I don't get, you know, dinged by YouTube. I want to get this monetized if at all possible. But he says it's BS and that you can't do that. And by taking the camera away from your face, you're not one with the subject. You're not one with the moment. And he was saying essentially it's like chimping. Back in the day when, you know, the 70 Mark II came out and all these DSLRs with high burst rates. That means you could take a lot of pictures at once. When these cameras came out, you know, the 1D, 1DX, 1DX Mark II, 3, whatever, these cameras could take a lot of pictures in a second. 10, 12, 14, maybe even 16 frames per second. And when you're shooting with a DSLR, that encourages you to take the camera away from the screen and look down. And this is what you call chimping. You're looking and reviewing at your pictures, you know, to see what you got and what you didn't get. And this is kind of what Jared is alluding to. Taking the camera away from your body, your face, takes you out of the moment, and you might miss a moment. You might not be able to frame, compose, do all this other stuff. And it's just a lazy way of shooting. And now I'm going to tell my opinion. And I think that Tony is right to a certain extent here, a little bit more than Jared. I think Jared is right if you're doing sports photography. And the reason why is because sports photography keeps you in the mindset of what's going on. But Tony could also be right in the sports sense because sports, you get tunnel vision if you have a 300, 200 millimeter lens, especially if it's a prime 400, 600 millimeter lens. You can't really see the action. And they talked about this as well, where you could shoot with both eyes open, even though you're shooting with the viewfinder in your, the electronic EVF up to your face, you know, the camera up to your face. You're using that screen, you can actually train yourself to open the other eye so you can see all of the things happening around you, giving you the maximum chance to anticipate any action like wildlife, sports, and all this other stuff. Now, with that said, not everybody can do that, and that is not easy. Let's lean towards the mindset of most people won't be able to do that. Since most people won't be able to do that, having your camera out does get heavy. And this is where I lean towards Jared a little bit more. If you have the camera up to your face and you can counterbalance a heavier lens in sports and wildlife, and anytime you're using a heavy lens like a 70-200, and 70-200s are not that heavy, let's get over that. But your 100 to 300 2.8s, your 100 to 400 3.5 to 5.6s, or your 150 to 600 Tamron, Sigma, the companies that make those lenses get heavy. You can't hold that up to your face for an extended period of time too long. Maybe I'll give most people on average an hour before they start to, get tired and their arms start to just not give you the image quality that you want. You'll start to get more shakier images, which lead to higher shutter speeds because you can't keep your images still. And especially if you start to lose light at maybe a Friday night football game for a high school or something like that. So these are things you want to think about when it comes to taking your eyepiece away from here and holding it down here, because the further away you hold it from your body, I would assume most people would get weaker doing that. So I want to say I'm leaning towards the Jared Polin way of thinking on this one, but I find myself when I'm trying to get a creative angle, like a low angle, turn that screen up, high angle, turn the screen down, all these other things, because especially when you're doing like a big, I want to say a championship type game, if you hold the camera up, you tilt it down, you get that shot where everybody is crowding around each other. Maybe they'll throw a whole bunch of Gatorade on the coach or whatever, all this stuff. You won't be able to line them up and get that very, very candid moment where you're able to get the shot. And there's a lot of paparazzi, a lot of competing photographers around you. So a lot of times I find myself flipping the screen around and just go ahead and just let a burst rate of images off and shoot it as wide as I can, 24 millimeters. And if I'm lucky, I have a 16 millimeter in the bag, because that 16 millimeter 2.8 RF lens is great for something like that. But you have to understand, depending on what situation you're in, having the screen out here is really, really good, and it'll give you a picture that you've never seen before. Sometimes that's the picture that you remember from the entire album. But then if you want to get a lot of pictures and you have to have an album ready, a lot of pictures that are from different teams, maybe you're doing a competition, and it just really depends on what situation you're in, because if I need a lot of pictures, all my pictures are going to be taken here at my eye level. It's going to be taken with that viewfinder at the top, my eyepiece viewfinder, and I keep messing up the terms, but you understand what I'm saying. The camera's going to be up here because I need as many keepers as possible. But when you're shooting out here, you can get more creative. So like I said, I lean towards both ways of shooting. I don't go to just one way of shooting, and I would not agree with Tony if he said all the shots he took is right down here by his waist. I wouldn't do that. I would definitely have most of my pictures taken up here by my face. Or with my camera by my face, so I'll understand exactly what I'm getting, and it's just more of a traditional way. I can see my focus points a little bit better. Those LCD screens aren't always the best, especially if you go cheaper, and I think a lot of these things, as we go down the line with most of these debates, it comes back to them not really realizing that they have the higher end cameras. They have the R1s maybe if they wanted to. They have the Hasselblads. They can have a Leica if they wanted to. They have the higher end Canon cameras where they have the best screens, where Tony could afford to do something like this because the screens look better in outside weather. But one of the biggest advantages of having a mirrorless camera is having both of those screens. And I don't want Canon and Nikon and Panasonic and Sony to get the bright idea that they need to take away those screens that we use for our eyes, because it can block out a lot of the sun despite how low res our viewfinder is that flips out and stuff like that. Especially with Canon trying to go to the new flip screen. Yes, they're probably going to chimp out on some of the price when it comes to lower end bodies. Therefore, your resolution might not be that great. So don't rely on what Tony said there. But I agree with both of them to a certain extent. Jared more so. So another thing that I thought was weird about the debate was the difference between wanting to test what you know. You see, when you're using a camera instead of a cell phone, smartphone, or any other device that pretty much automates the experience, using that mirrorless camera gives you something more than any other camera on the market. It's control. Being able to put that thing in manual mode and get exactly what you want despite what the camera thinks. You can use manual autofocus points. You have a myriad of options in the menu system from Canon, Panasonic, Sony to be able to tweak and trim anything the way you want it to. And then Jared shoots raw, and Jared says, I want to tweak the picture the way I want to. You might hear him say tweaky McTweakerson. He wants to be able to change exactly the colors. He has all his presets, his Skittles, he has everything to change things how he wants to change it. But when it comes to testing, he doesn't test things. And the reason why I think this is an important kind of contradiction is that you really want to know what you're getting out of these cameras. And you really want to know when your camera fails, because you need to understand your specific device. I could have a Nikon Z6 Mark II or Z7 or whatever, but if I switch over to Canon, Canon has flaws that those cameras don't have. That's why testing is important, so you know exactly what you're getting out of. And when I say testing, I use testing as a broad terminology, meaning we need to know exactly how many megapixels that we have. We need to know how many images we have when we go to higher ISOs, because that changes our maximum amount of images. We need to know how video is going to work after hours of 8K. We need to understand how our cars are going to work. We need to test all these things because technology is not perfect. As a matter of fact, when the next firmware update comes out for the R5, R5 Mark II, R5C, whatever newest, latest, greatest Canon camera, maybe the R6 Mark III, I won't be updating it until maybe a couple of months down the line when people have tested it, tried and true. Because when I first got the R5, I didn't know that the hot shoe was going to break. That's a physical test that I didn't go through because I had the 7D Mark I, I had the 80D, the T2i, and all these durable DSLRs. I would have never thought the camera that I spent more money on wasn't tried and true, tested from Canon. I don't think what do they call it when you test all, quality control wasn't there, or they just didn't do something in the process. But I'm telling you, these hot shoes are falling off these cameras, and I regretted not testing. Even though I would have kept the R5, I had to go into the R5 and fix it myself. And this is one of the most, I want to say, anxiety-inducing things about the whole purchasing of a camera that I didn't test. I didn't go through other people's experiences and weigh out the numbers, theorize things like Tony Northrup. Tony Northrup has always encouraged testing. You have to go through it yourself. You have to go through any new process yourself. So if we go back to the simple photo hack, taking your camera from here and putting it here, Jared doesn't want to test the numbers. He doesn't want to go through how many images that he would love to have versus how many images he wouldn't love to have from going from here to here. And actually saying that it's the proper way, I think is wrong for Jared. Jared says it's the proper way to have your camera up here instead of having it down here and looking down and then surveying the field and everything like that. Whereas Tony disagrees with him. I don't agree with the way Jared is saying it, because he's saying it's not the proper way, but I'm not going to test whether or not it's the proper way. Well, how would you know if it's the proper way? And then on top of that, photography has changed so much. But even in the past, photography traditionally wasn't always holding your camera up to your face like this. Because you had, I think it was the twins lens reflex cameras, the TLRs, and then some medium format cameras, because I didn't shoot film, so I don't really know. But I know Jared knows that some cameras were shot down here. And you had to look down into the camera, advance the film, do all this other stuff, take the slides out. But the cameras were down here if you didn't have them on a tripod. They weren't designed to hold up here to take the picture. You had to hold it down here to actually see through the twin lens reflex camera or the TLR or whatever. And if anybody who is more advanced in the film days and can correct me on some of these things or add more information in the comments below, please let me know. But I know all cameras in history have not been held up to your face with the lens out here. I'm not going to say it hasn't always been around, because it's pretty much always been around since the antiquity of photography. But there have been several different ways in where we take our pictures where the camera's not traditionally up here by your face. So to say that it's the proper way is a little bit disingenuous, I think, on Jared's part, because I know he's shot with cameras that you have to hold down here, large format cameras, because he's gotten to prints a lot, and he's gotten to different ways where he goes back in time and he gets those film cameras and he does those bigger prints and he compares them to the new digital cameras that we see nowadays. And he has the ability to do that. I'm pretty sure he's well off enough with 1.5 million subscribers to do these things. So I think it's disingenuous to say it's a proper way to do that, because when people that are educators of photography say that and they have so much influence, people are going to think, oh, I have to have the camera down here and I have to have the camera up here. I do agree with Jared that I would prefer to have the camera up here by my face and hold the lens right here, because I feel like I can hold it for a long period of time. But I also agree with Tony when I say when I want to get something creative, I'll hold it down here. Now Tony probably holds it down here and flips up the screen a lot more. So with that said, there are some things that are a little bit disingenuous in the argument I feel is on Jared's part, but I do agree with Jared more so often than not. I'm going to have that camera up to my face. All right, so now we're getting into the meat of the argument, RAW versus JPEG. Now, as we all know, Jared has it plastered all over his branding. I shoot RAW, which means he shoots in an uncompressed photo format. You're taking pictures with all the information of that picture that the camera can muster, and it's spitting it out to you so you can actually edit as much as you can and get the colors as best you can, get all the presence about the image the best you can. And most, I want to say, professionals probably do shoot RAW if they know about the benefits of it. Now, Tony is saying that he thinks in a large way JPEG is better, but you have to also understand that Tony largely shoots RAW himself. Is this a contradiction? I don't think so. And the reason why I say that is because when you think about JPEGs you can use on all formats. I don't need some extravagant program to pull up a JPEG. I can pull up a Lightroom, Photoshop, Capture One, and it doesn't matter what year of Lightroom, Photoshop, and Capture One that I have, it's always going to pick up that JPEG. And no matter what camera, no matter what year, and now I know that in the RAW world, depending on what year software you have, especially with Lightroom, you might not be able to pull up a new CR3 file, ARW file from Sony or a Nikon RAW file. You just might not be able to do that. And I think RAW files are NEF for Nikon, but depending on which year, the software knows if you got a new camera that has a new RAW file, so it'll make you update to the newest, latest, greatest software. And with these cloud subscriptions where you have to pay monthly because it's a digital subscription, it gets more and more expensive. Where back in the day, you had to pay for, I want to say, Lightroom, and you can just pay for it once. And as long as you didn't update your Lightroom RAW files or got a new camera, like a CR3, going from CR2 to CR3, as long as you didn't get that new RAW file, you were good to keep that same Lightroom software that was a one-time purchase. Like, for example, Lightroom 4 and Lightroom 5. I remember when they came out that everybody just wanted to keep it. But then, Creative Cloud came out, then you had to have the subscription payment. Whereas, if you have a JPEG, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. You can edit a JPEG in Photoshop easily. RAW files are a little bit harder to edit in Photoshop. Why? Because you have to open Adobe Camera Raw and then import it into Photoshop. And I think it has to be a CR. It could still be a RAW file, but then it comes back into the Lightroom catalog as a TIFF. There's a whole bunch of different workflow things that you had to add on. Then don't stop to mention how much space a RAW file takes. And Jared tends to not even want to go lossy compressed RAW or any kind of other RAW file format that, is less weight on your memory and your money. Because we're talking about memory, we're talking about money. And like I said, this is more along of an elite type of conversation for pros, because most pros have this stuff. They have the workflow. They have the computer that can hack all these RAW files that are just being shoveled into your computer with pre-burst. This new technology that has come with cameras where you can burst rate images without even actually releasing the shutter, just so you make sure you get the moment. Then these higher frame rates, we're going up to 40 and 50 frames per second on some of these cameras in RAW, and these cameras just don't quit. They will give you 1,000 images in what would amount to less than 2 minutes now. And it's like, wow, what am I going to do after that? Even if you have video, at least video is easier to manage what you want versus what you don't want. If you see 1,000 to 2,000 frames of just one moment, and I'm just being hyperbolic, I'm exaggerating here, but you're getting up to the point where we're seeing a lot of one particular moment. Your ability to choose what image you want becomes paramount. So you don't have to sit and throw all this stuff in a hard drive and pay for all this stuff that you don't need at one moment. It just becomes ridiculous. And that's why Tony is saying JPEG is better. It's not a contradiction that he shoots RAW, because I don't think he was ever saying that he only shoots JPEG. But I guess most people pegged him as the JPEG end of the discussion, where, of course, Jared was the RAW photograph end of the discussion. And they just put it in that kind of context, where I'm pretty sure Tony shoots more RAW images than anything else. But also Tony says that if it's a less important event, he's going to shoot JPEG, which I totally agree with Tony on this. If it's a less important event, I'll just shoot JPEG or whatever. There are different times where photographers who are shooting jobs, that are shooting for labs, that are shooting straight to print, that have to get everything right in camera and have to shoot a JPEG and have to shoot it off directly to an editor immediately so they can compete with the competition. If they're shooting for these big corporations that have these labs and all these other things, you have to know what this is going to do to your wallet over time. You have to know exactly what it's going to do for you over a long period of time. And it can get redundant about how much money you're spending. You might as well just shoot JPEG because you can do a larger burst rate. Your camera doesn't get as hot. You can shoot as many pictures as you wanted to and still choose through them without using as much memory. Your buffer pretty much never goes out because the cameras are so great nowadays. The white balance, the auto corrections, all these things in camera are really decent nowadays. You have auto HDR. It's okay. It's not perfect. You have the stitch panoramas. They're okay-ish. They're not perfect, but they all come out as some kind of either HEIF file, HEIF, the high efficiency JPEG codec, or the regular JPEG file. So with that said, I agree with Tony on this spectrum that you can use RAW or JPEG. And yes, Jared has said, oh, I'll shoot JPEGs on the side, but it's going to be in succession with RAW files. That's okay too. Like I said, you shoot, like I said in my last video too, you shoot what you want to shoot based on how you need to shoot. But at the end of the day, we have cameras that can shoot both. Why is it a debate whether or not to shoot RAW versus JPEG? Is it because Jared is saying people are lazy and they don't want to edit their own pictures? Or maybe are they just comfortable with come straight out of the camera? That's like saying don't shoot IPB video, shoot RAW video instead. And RAW video is even 10 times worse when it comes to compatibility, when it comes to your computer working with it. Don't get me started on ProRes RAW in Premiere Pro because they just don't work well together. And when you start to think about these things, you start to really put into perspective what you want to do in the long term with photography. And a lot of people just are comfortable with taking JPEGs. I mean, even most cell phones shoot JPEGs. A lot of people are comfortable with that. So if the people don't know the difference between RAW and JPEG files coming out of your camera and you're doing it for clients, yeah, you can be competitive, convert your RAWs to JPEGs, get them out to your clients and stuff like that. But we're not going to debate whether or not you shoot RAW and JPEG when you can do both. You see what I'm saying? That's like debating whether or not you have a 100 megapixel camera and the 100 megapixel camera also gives you the option for 25, 50, 75 megapixels and 100. If you have the ability to shoot in any other lower format, why not just do it and not argue about whether or not to use either or when you have the option of both? Now, if there were cameras that can only shoot RAW, if there were cameras that only shot JPEG, I would understand this whole debate about RAW versus JPEG. But if you've never shot RAW, I would definitely encourage you to shoot RAW. If you have not shot JPEG, which most people have, shoot JPEG and try to master your image straight out of the camera. If you're so used to shooting RAW and correcting your images, shoot JPEG sometime. Try to get it straight out of the camera, almost like a film photographer would. Try to get everything as right as you possibly can. Get a balance of both. Understand both. Understand the benefits of being able to really, really manipulate your picture, understanding how far you should take an edit, how far you shouldn't take an edit. Then also understand how well you can actually get a picture straight out of camera and rely on your JPEG format to do the rest for you. And this goes into another reason why I disagree with Jared a lot is because he says he's not like them. A large part of the way he teaches is about the way he shoots. And despite there might be other options for you to do things like, Tony coming from your camera here to here after years and years and decades of shooting photography, Jared feels like he's not like them and he won't recommend anybody to do anything other than what he's already learned. And I think this is not a good way to teach. When I teach my students, I teach them, okay, this is how I do things. Now, you can do this, but these are the drawbacks of doing this. And if you find that doing this doesn't help you, then you can go back to a more traditional way or a way that I've learned it, and this might help you a little bit more. I let them know both ends of the spectrum. If you like to shoot RAW, but understand that if you don't find a way to garner money from your photography, it's going to get expensive shooting photography. If you want to shoot JPEG, but I'm going to let you know, student, that if you shoot JPEG for a long extended period of time, you might not understand the depths of how much color information, how you can bring back the exposure from a high dynamic range situation. And therefore, I would encourage you to occasionally shoot RAW to understand the depth of your picture and to push your camera to its maximum height. That's how I teach. I will teach a concept based in that, rooted in that type of mentality. Now, understand this. If a student can shoot all their JPEGs and they're comfortable, and everybody that they work for, all their bosses, all their clients, shoot JPEG. I don't care. But if they're struggling with that, hey, try raw out. Try to recover that dress that you shot at the wedding that was all white, because all students do that, and it doesn't have any texture. Or you go back to this other end of the spectrum and do the other, and vice versa. You have to understand how to understand all perspective, not just your own. So here's another concept that I thought Jared was contradicting himself on, and it was the pre-shooting of the camera. So going back to RAW versus JPEG, Jared kind of contradicts his own point in a roundabout way when it comes to pre-capture. Because pre-capture is a new ability of the camera. Of course, you're able to pre-capture images before you really release the shutter, giving you more instances of that event before you started shooting. So you're able to get a moment that you may have not have gotten in the past within that succession of pictures. But pre-capture ends up putting a lot of information, a lot of pictures that you didn't think you took are now on your camera, especially if they are raw, especially if they are high megapixel. And you understand how many images you get later by going back in your computer and finding out how much memory you have consumed. And this is the reason why raw pictures are a little bit of a detriment to you, because of how much information you consume. If you add pre-capture, high resolution, full-size RAW on top of JPEGs, which Jared is claiming that he is shooting, then it's going to eat your memory up. Now, the reason why Jared is contradicting himself, because I know a lot of people are going to come for me in the comments about this, is because he said JPEG is not good. You should never use JPEG. If anything, it's rare that you should ever use JPEG. You're going to use it alongside of RAW. But JPEGs don't take as much memory as RAW. If you're shooting JPEG and you're shooting pre-capture, it'll be way less memory on your computer. But if you're shooting RAW plus JPEG and you're shooting pre-capture and you're shooting an A1 or R1 or R5 Mark II, these higher megapixel bodies with higher information RAW files, it's going to kill you when it comes to the editing and the organization, and it's going to kill your time that you don't have to spare, memory and money that you don't have to spare. And like I said, it was already hard enough shooting pre-capture, and then having these cameras that do 16, 20, 40 frames per second, 50 frames per second, at over 50 megapixels, some of these cameras, like the A1 and stuff like that, or the A1. But you got to understand that these types of situations put a lot of work on you in post. And when they put a lot of work on you in post, there's not much you can do but to go through and sift through, or it defeats the whole purpose of you going out there. Like Jared was saying, I was like, oh yeah, I was going out on safari and I was shooting. But not a lot of people can go out on a safari and shoot hundreds of thousands of pictures and then come back from one event and then have the time to edit them and have it be a viable thing for them to be a viable photographer in the future. It's just not something. Now, if you've already established yourself as a pro photographer over years, and you can go out there to the Sahara, you can go out to safari, you can go out and do all sorts of stuff. Yes, but most people can't do National Geographic. Most people can't do wildlife. Even I like to shoot wildlife every once in a while, but I don't even have the lenses to shoot wildlife. There is a class for all of this, and Jared is at the pinnacle of that class. Even Tony is at the pinnacle of the class. But you have to understand that Tony understands where he is. Tony understands the privilege that he has shooting as a photographer, and understands that when he is shooting and when he is teaching, it is two separate worlds. He has the money for I'm not going to speak for Tony too much, but I'm pretty sure he has the finances and the wherewithal to either buy, rent, or get sponsored by Canon or anything like that. I'm not saying that he's sponsored. I'm not sponsored. And I'm pretty sure Jared's not sponsored. But you got to understand that he could get this gear in his hands, whether it's buying it by himself or using it just for a video for a long period of time. I have no idea, but he can get his hands on this stuff a lot easier than most of us. Even if we rent it, I don't think Tony and Jared has that type of fee that they have to pay. I'm not sure, but understand, I know they have it easier than we do when it comes to photography and having photography in their life, because they are so successful at their job. With 1.5 million subscribers based on photography, You're not going to tell me that you can't get a lot more of this gear easier in your hands, whether it be a 600 millimeter f4, 500 millimeter f4, whatever like that. These huge hulking lenses that cost tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars in some situations. So with that said, when you're teaching, you have to keep that in mind that most people are with their Rebel T7. Most people are with their cheap 85 millimeter that costs them 100, 200 bucks, 300 bucks. That's from the EF days. Some people are with their plastic fantastic shampoo bottle cap of a lens. That's how it is for most students and most people that you're teaching. It's not, oh, everybody's shooting with their 1D, let's go on safari. Everybody, or not 1D, but R1, or their A1 Mark II, or their Sony, or their Nikon, whatever the Z8 is. You see what I'm saying? Not many people can do that and have $300,000 worth of lenses and then let's just go back on safari and let's go. It's not what we can do. And wildlife photography is one of the most expensive forms of photography. So with that said, you can't just wildly sling things. Yes, that's something to aspire to. And all of us would probably like to do that if we were photographers that were really enthusiastic about the technology and what we could do and what kind of image that we can present to the public. But it's just, let's think about what position we're in. All right, so this is the last section of the debate, and this is crop versus no crop. Jared is on the lines of, hey, I shoot it exactly how I want it to look straight out of camera. There's no possible way that I can mess up the crop, composition, the framing. It's how I took it in the camera. And if you change that about my image, it's no longer my work. And Tony's like, oh, there's no reason why you should be so harsh on yourself about cropping. You can always crop. You can crop at any time. Now, in doing this, Jared has now said, if he was in a situation where his work had got cropped, it's no longer his work. For example, if somebody took his work, he photographed for a wedding or something like that, and they used it in a way that it cropped out something or a person or some form of visual in his image that is no longer his work, I disagree with that. I wholeheartedly disagree with that because as a photographer, you are paid for the entire image. Even if somebody takes a portion of that image out, it's still your work and you should still take credit for it, but you should also let them know that, hey, this was not the actual work that, such and such took. It was modified, but this is the actual, this was the work that he took, but it was modified and edited to a certain extent. Now, in your clauses and your agreements and your contracts, you can tell people what to do, how to present your work and stuff like that. But long story short, in most cases, your work will be cropped in this day and age of Instagram, Photoshop, all this other stuff. What does cropping mean nowadays? You have to understand the modern world, the modern digital world of cropping. Everything is in this square format for your phone. So since everything is in the square format for your phone, you have to understand that the work that you did might not be exactly 100% the crop that you want. Now, do I think that you should disown it completely? No, I think that's ridiculous. I think you should still take credit for it, but let people know, like, hey, do you want to see my full version of this picture? And then incentivize them that way. Like, hey, go to my website. Well, none of my images are cropped. Like Squarespace. I know Tony is usually sponsored by Squarespace. I'm not sure about Jared Polin, but you have to understand that these photographers and photographers just in general, you have to be okay with where the world is going, because whether or not you like it, AI, don't get me started on AI, but AI does benefit us. And there's AI and computer generated things and cameras. A lot of things when you go to your editing bay in Lightroom, Photoshop, whatever, is AI generated. And there's almost nothing we can do about it. You even have this little tick mark on the edge of your Lightroom catalog that lets somebody know or lets you know what AI generated elements that you added to this picture. So, and just in case you go to, I want to say, a social media platform with it, that let somebody know this is AI generated because I'm listing out all the AI edits that you're making on this image, because not all edits are AI generated. So it's just, you have to understand. One thing that I do love about AI is that it helps with the noise reduction a lot. But let's go back to cropping, because cropping can also be AI, of course. and cropping and then your image is a very, very loaded term nowadays, because if you AI generated a portion of the image, how much of that image do you own, and do you owe somebody else credit for it? There is so many things about AI that is just this large, unknown, vast world, and it's getting stronger every day. It's getting harder and harder for people to understand what is really real. What did you actually capture versus what you didn't capture? What part of the image did you capture versus what part of the image that you didn't capture? And Photoshop started this a long time ago when you're able to composite images and take certain parts out of images and put other things in images, take the background out, puts a whole different background in it. So you have to understand cropping has almost a whole different definition now. And it's basically talking about image manipulation, but now we can add parts of other images to your images. Now, who owns the image is a little bit in question now. And I understand how Jared feels. He wants to make sure he has credit for his images like every other photographer does. Yes, of course, Jared. But I don't see any reason why not to crop because we're using 3:2 aspect ratio cameras. We rarely have the aspect ratios that align with prints like the 8:10 and the 5:7 and all sorts of stuff that crops your images. Well, when you go to print an image, and Jared loves prints because his studio has a lot of prints and he loves printers and stuff like that. I love printers. You have to understand that you're going to chop off a certain part of your image. So you might take an image wider to compensate for that, like a group picture, which I take a lot. If you take a lot of group pictures and you crop, because you want to make sure the image matches some kind of print, it might not be the original composition that you want to. Another big thing that, if you guys haven't been watching Jared for a long time, you don't know this, but I was watching Jared for a long time. I remember this one specific incident. It was actually more recent, where an architectural photographer was critiquing the real estate photography, or specifically a real estate photographer was critiquing Jared's real estate photography, and immediately he told him to straighten the image in post. And when you straighten the image in post, you have to crop it. When you straighten the lines and you do your geometric flattening of the image, because most of our lenses are spherical. Basically, they are circular on the front end and a bow. And so barrel distortion, pincushion distortion, all these distortions come because your lenses are not completely flat. They're circular in a sense. And a lot of times the sensor crops off the edges of that lens, but it causes a lot of optical issues. But you get into this world of, it's very, very hard to know what's authentic. From our tools changing the crops to our images needing the rectilinear flat look, that accurate look, from architecture to real estate. All these things can be very, very deceiving and hard to get into. And all we can do is take it one day at a time. But to not crop it all and to shun it and to not move with the times and understanding that cropping is important. Man, look at all these megapixels we got. We got cameras that go up medium format, 100 megapixels. What are we going to do with all those megapixels? And are we going to be able to really perceive the difference, especially if we don't have the lenses that can resolve that much? Cropping is necessary to actually utilize things that we've never... If I don't have the lens, we need to utilize our cropping techniques and our megapixels to get closer to the subjects that we don't have the lenses for. Like I said, this is more of an elitist type of argument where you gotta have the lenses to get to all your focal lengths. And that's not realistic and practical for everybody. Cause I'm good up from 24 to 200 millimeters, but the more telephoto I get, the more expensive these fast aperture lenses are. We all know that. If I get a 500 f4, that's a lot of money. If I get a 100 to 300 2.8 like my friend has, that's a lot of money. And I can't just justify getting that extra 100 to 200 to 300 millimeters worth of focal length and trying to keep the same image quality by keeping it at constant aperture length. There's not a lot of constant aperture lens in the prime world when it comes to those longer telephoto length lenses over 300 millimeters. So when we think about these things, we have to understand everybody's contextual situation when we're extrapolating our opinions and our thoughts and our processes out to the masses. The last part of this video was mainly cooled. It was mainly, more agreeable between the two. They were talking about pre-capture. Tony was talking about how he thinks that new cameras are boring. They're just cut and paste. They're not really listening to us, thinking about the things that we need, like security. Yes, Canon came out with a new security update where you can put a code in there, but it's not the security update that you think it is. It's not going to protect your pictures from being stolen or your camera from being stolen. And then you have the pre-capture, which they agreed on is a really, really good technique and a really, really good feature to have on your cameras to go about shooting images and having the ability to save images that were not saved before, or you didn't get a chance to release the shutter before it happened. Because there are a lot of things that you can't argue with about this new technology. Having high burst rates is nice. 50 frames per second, I don't know if we need that. 40 frames per second is really nice. I like that on the R6 Mark II, but you have to understand all this new tech requires you to be on your A game. And I like the fact that they agreed on something. Once again, guys, I like Tony. I like Jared. As far as creators are concerned, they are two of my favorite creators. I have learned so much from both. They just have different ways of teaching, and you have to watch out for it. You have to watch out for what is more rhetorical. You have to watch out for what is more personal to them versus what you can actually do. If they're talking about all these telephoto primes and all these expensive lenses that you might not have the money for yet, you have to think about workarounds. You have to think about the weaknesses in your gear. If you don't have an EVF, if you don't have a long-term battery, you need to find out other ways to get you a long-term battery so you can shoot video. Jared Polin, he uses a lot of R5s for his video. A lot of people can't afford multiple R5s to do what they're doing in photography. So you have to understand that the way these photographers live is different. And even though Tony is very, very moderated, Jared might not be so moderated. He might not be so balanced in his way of thinking. And a lot of times Jared thinks about only his perspective, and he doesn't really give room for the beginner's perspective, somebody that's just starting out. And he might not have a nifty way around a camera's weakness. Maybe there's autofocus points. Maybe it's ISO range. Maybe it's light collecting abilities. Maybe it's lens cost, because lenses end up costing way more than the camera. All these things are tried and true issues that most beginners have. You have to watch out that on that front from Jared, but Jared has one of the most entertaining, one of the most lively shows. Jared is on the heels of Tony and Chelsea Northrup at 1.5 million subscribers, where they have about, I want to say, closer to 1.6 million subscribers. So it's definitely a rivalry, and they're trying to get as much out of the apple as they possibly can. Jared has come a long way, because I think it was a bigger gap between the two, but now it's neck and neck, and you have to understand exactly where they're coming from. Tony is a lot more theoretical, and a lot of the things he does, he has to test and test and test. It can get hard to listen to Tony sometimes because you might not understand what he's talking about. But I guarantee you, if you listen to Tony over a long period of time, you'll understand exactly where he's going. And all these things that he does to challenge himself to be a better photographer is good in the long run. Jared Polin used to critique a lot of people in his videos and their specific work. Now he's gotten away from that. He's a lot less stern than he used to be. And there's a lot of different things that you can learn about Jared. You can learn his confidence, his swag. He always has his I shoot raw. You have to be confident in what you do. And that's something big that Jared has always pushed to the masses. Be gloriously independent and individual about what you want to do and believe in yourself. I think Jared does that better than anybody else. And he's the only person getting up there, and you got to give it up to Jared Polin, because you only see him. I shoot raw, Pro knows photo, some of the best branding that I've ever seen in the photography world. So you got to give it up to Jared Polin. You got to give it up to Tony Northrup. Keep watching both of these channels. Subscribe to both. Don't be a rival, even though they have different opinions. Let's get away from this, extreme it's okay to be competitive, but this extreme competitive market in photography will keep you from learning. I'm Devin with Century FX Studios TV, back with another video, guys. I just wanted to get this out to you guys. I know this was a long form video. Support the channel in the links below, cash out, descriptions, all this stuff, and links below, affiliate links. Make your comments in the description below or the boxes below. You know what to do. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.